here again on this campus where I spent 4 of my formative years, and to be back in this auditorium where TCU's academic accomplishments are so often celebrated. It's also good to have a reason to bring my regalia out of the closet and show my colors. I don't have that many opportunities to do so in Washington. Among the influential people that I met at TCU when I was here was Ralph Waldo Emerson, who 176 years ago gave a notable address at his alma mater to the Phi Beta Kappa Association, the Phi Beta Kappa Society at Harvard College then. It was a declaration of intellectual independence and an assertion of a distinctively American style of scholarship. Emerson's title was The American Scholar, and the lecture was so well received that the Phi Beta Kappa Society adopted that as the title for its scholarly journal. While endorsing the love of letters, by which he meant literature and the fine arts, Emerson departed from the importance of classical learning, traditional studies, and claimed new foundations for the educated American. And remember, the United States was still fairly young. He gave this address in 1837. According to Emerson, the first and primal influence must be nature, as he understood nature. And that was as the unity of everything, the unity of life, creation, soul, mind, spirit. Contemplation of nature in its myriad forms, in all the parts of its whole, through the sciences, the arts, literature, the disciplines of the liberal arts, reveals the transcendent truth that everything is connected. One of his maxims was, know thyself and study nature. They were the same path to insight and understanding. Next must be the mind of the past, in whatever form it was inscribed, books especially. Yet he said that books are for the scholar's idle times. He sought to distinguish thinkers from man thinking, or in today's ungendered language, scholar thinking. Mere thinkers learn the knowledge of the past, but scholars create new knowledge for the present and the future. Emerson argued for creative reading as well as creative writing. He thought the American scholar should be original, and the purpose of books was to inspire, because each age must create its own books. The other great influence on the American scholar, he said, was action. The scholar must live and work, not be a recluse in an ivory tower. Book learning was not enough. Action, he said, is the raw material out of which intellect molds her splendid products. Only so much do I know as I have lived. Emerson claimed life is our dictionary. Rodin's contemplative seated scholar, man thinking, or the thinker, would not be the posture that Emerson would have sculpted. He would have had an active scholar. So having established nature, the mind, and action as the foundation of scholarship, Emerson next addressed duty. It is the duty of the thinking American scholar to cheer, to raise, to guide others. The scholar must be free and brave and confident to stand up to controversy and criticism, and has a duty to elevate human discourse and understanding. So we have in the 19th century this model of a scholar as being alert, aware, engaged, original, active. The thinking scholar turns action into ideas and ideas into inspiration. So let's skip ahead 2 centuries now. almost and asked, does the Emersonian model still have vitality today, or are there new and different hallmarks of the American scholar? Well, certainly the methods of scholarship are dramatically different, thanks to advances in computing and communications primarily. Technology has made scholarship much more rapid, and also differences in learning theory. We now know of multiple ways to learn. We have access to information and we can manipulate it in breadth and depth and scope and speed that keep increasing, and we can only assume that such advances will continue. We simply know more now and know it more quickly than he could have imagined. We can do research in moments by just using the finger on a device in the palm of our hands. And we can do collaborative research across time and space. And I suspect some of our faculty here are in fact engaged in research with scholars at other institutions and maybe other countries around the world. We are so connected, so instantaneously, not only to information, but to vast networks of people and images and experiences, that knowledge and scholarship are truly global in scope in a way that they could not have been in Emerson's day. We think and absorb and synthesize and create so rapidly and share, and in so many modes and so communally, that today's scholar can hardly be a solitary individual. Today's thinker is armed with technology and connections that vastly expand the range of inquiry and learning and the community of scholars itself. I have to think that Emerson would have delighted in cell phones and iPads, virtual reality and lasers, Google and Windows and Adobe software, everything that today improves our knowledge and creativity. But what about the fundamentals of becoming a scholar? What about those inner traits? Not just the technologies that make being a scholar easier and more effective. Today, I look at what you were doing here, your curriculum, your activities, and your stated values. Over the last few years, and particularly the last week, I have been observing the nature of scholars and scholarship here at TCU. And these are some of my observations about not just the American scholar today, but the global scholar today, as evidenced at TCU. Your big question discussion groups strike me as a fine example of the kind of provocative, original thinking that Emerson had in mind. Your focus on critical thinking and creative inquiry is certainly germane, as is your emphasis on collaboration and community involvement. The caliber of honors research projects that I witnessed this week speaks volumes about the originality of students here and the careful mentorship they receive from the faculty. Most impressive research. The core curriculum at TCU is both practical in its insistence on essential competencies, but challenging in opportunities to expand your exploration of intellectual and cultural heritages. And one can almost hear Emerson in TCU's mission statement: to educate individuals to think and act as ethical leaders and responsible citizens in the global community. I think that Emerson himself would admire what is happening here. Your educational experience arises from the influence of nature, the mind, action, and duty, although TCU expresses them in different terms. It's obvious that TCU is focused on producing scholars, not only American, but around the world, who are engaged, original, active, ethical, and prepared to make a difference globally. Now, before coming here this week, I dredged up my TCU transcripts, which is actually kind of faded. But I looked at it as a reality check on my memory of what my experience was as a scholar here at TCU. And sure enough, there were the unforgettable classes in literature and history. English and history were my majors. In music and art appreciation, which opened those worlds to me. A very challenging course in philosophy. If any of the faculty remember Dr. Gus Ferre, I never knew quite where I was in that class, but I was somewhere. 3 years. 3 years of foreign language study, a not so happy experience in golf. Regrettably, too little science and math. But there were the big questions, honors colloquia of my day. The nature of man, the nature of values, the nature of society, and the nature of the universe. Many of those courses and those who taught them remain active in my consciousness. I also looked at the roster of the faculty who had been named Honors Professor of the Year since the 1950s. And I realized in my 4 undergraduate years here, I studied with or knew half of the first 30 recipients of that award, including Dr. Rosnick, who was then chair of the honors program. 2 of my own 3 most influential professors were on the list, one before I came and one just after I left. The missing one was more reserved and perhaps perceived as less popular than the others, but he was the most significant in my formation as a scholar and certainly was worthy of having received that honor. And so today I would like to acknowledge as my personal honors professor, Dr. Fred R. Ehresmann, Professor of American Literature and the very model of a scholar. And I hope that he is here today. If you are, Dr. Ehresmann, I honor you, and I'm sure this community joins me in that. Although I set out to become a professor at a school like TCU, I hoped, I am often asked how I came to have such a different career or how I managed to land in the Smithsonian, which is hard to do because people who take positions there tend to hold them for a very long time. We don't have formal tenure, but we have de facto tenure. It wasn't my plan, and if I had planned it, I might not have been able to make it happen. But without knowing it at the time, my path there began right here in the honors program at TCU, where I really learned how to learn. And it was Dr. Ehresmann who introduced me to Emerson, the American scholar who became my muse. Although the focus of my graduate education was 19th century American studies, I developed an interest in the history of science during that era. And that interest in science and the ability to do research, to learn, to think, to write, opened the door to NASA and to working with scientists and engineers. And writing about science on the early space shuttle missions of the 1980s opened the door to the Smithsonian, to the Space History Division. And being a scholar in the Smithsonian, one of the world's great research and educational institutions dedicated to the increase and diffusion of knowledge, opened the door for me to return to TCU and to join you today. So there is serendipity and there is symmetry in life, and things come full circle. Everything is indeed connected. And so to the students here today, I urge you to cherish the scholars who have influenced you and keep them in your life as I have. And to the faculty, try to keep an eye on these students when they leave. They may astonish you in the highly original ways they become scholars. And to all of you, I offer hearty congratulations on the 50th anniversary of the TCU Honors Program. now matured into the John B. Roach Honors College. Cheers.